Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 7, Troubleshooting Your Code. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Coran. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Yeah, Matt, not too much, mainly because I'm getting married this week, so, I'm still figuring all that stuff out, but,
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, I'll see you there.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the wedding.
We were already there at the party, too, so,
yeah.
Some antics happened there, of course.
Yeah, bachelor party was, I guess, it's success.
Yeah, a 100% success.
Yeah. Definitely did its job. Other than that, I've been just doing my client work, grinding away at that, and doing some research for the upcoming projects for Hat. So I have some good ideas that I'll definitely hit the ground running with next week, now that the wedding preparation stuff will kind of finish.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So what about you, Matt?
Well, basically doing we have a rather large client project that's not ready for prime time yet, but it's going to be up in the next couple of days. So that's kind of what I've been focusing on, kind of helping them, and I've been we've been working in tandem, so it's a really big site kind of thing. So there's a lot of little nitty-gritty pieces. So I've been working in tandem, and we've been chiseling away for, I want to say, 2 months or so, getting the nitty-gritty down. But now that that's coming together, it's going to be out soon. And then I was doing some pretty interesting kind of social media research earlier as well, and we'll decide to kind of see what content people want and that type of thing. So that's kind of what I've been focusing on. And then I have a couple of little background things I've been setting up for Hat, we're looking at getting a subreddit and that type of thing. And that'll of course be announced on the show when it comes to fruition. But as we do every week, we have a bunch of segments, and then we have our recurring segment, Web News. To go over those segments, we got segment number 1, Troubleshooting Methodologies. Segment number 2, which is Debugging in the Browser. Segment number 3, which is Application/Storytime, which you'll understand once we get there. And then, of course, Web News. So these are some jam-packed segments. And this one is, of course, Experience Doesn't Trump Research for Web News. So it's related to one of the other segments we have here, and these segments have a bunch of subsections, so it's going to be a really packed episode this week. So to kick her off, we're going to have segment number 1, which is Troubleshooting Methodologies, as I said. So the first subsection of this segment is Process of Elimination. So basically, when you're troubleshooting, when something comes up, basically you want to eliminate blocks of your project that can be separated from each other. So let's say, for example, you just start out with a project, you have a menu built and a button. And the button, when you click it, the menu appears. Really easy, right? Well, let's say, you start building up the page, right? You start building the page, you start building a bunch of other options, a bunch of buttons, a bunch of whatever. And a bunch of commits later, you go back to test something, you click on that menu button, and the menu doesn't open. So obviously you got to start troubleshooting at this point. So what we will do is we'll kind of start divvying it up. So more or less you can kind of divvy it up, assuming your commits are kind of done in proper chunks and not done super frequently. You can kind of go in and separate the changes one by one. So what we'll do, or what I'll do personally, is sort of go through and disable stuff. So I'll be like, okay, change 1, I'll disable that. Change 2, let's disable it. But I'll do it one by one, and I'll see, does the button work now? No. Okay, turn this one back on. Now turn off, segment 2. Does the button work now? No. Okay, turn back on segment 2. Let's try segment, 3. And I'll kind of go through and slowly start doing it. Once I find a troublesome segment, so let's say my 4th commit or my 4th little segment was broken and it was causing the problem, I will re-enable that segment so the bug is still there. But then I'll try to, depending on how complex it is, I will try to modularize the actual segment itself, or the little commit there, or the change. And basically what I'll do is I'll try to apply the same process. If I can modularize it, I will, and then I'll break it up just like I would, like I just described with the process of elimination, and try to say oh, is it the color change that's breaking it? Is it the overlap? Am I applying an opacity incorrectly? Is there a pointer events property going awry? Whatever is happening in the function, I'll try to slowly do it. And eventually you'll, really kind of figure out what the problem is, and then you can do your proper investigation and actually do it. Now, the thing with the process of elimination is it can be applied to more than just programming. So you'll kind of start, because you'll be probably doing this quite often when you have problems with your programming, with your code, and it'll become almost like second hand, like it'll just become like second nature to you rather. So you'll just kind of like figure out like, something will happen in your life. So I have a kind of an example here. So, if you're making some sort of electronic, you'll have like a little chip, let's say, that controls the lights. So let's say you have this full circuit with resistors and transistors and the whole bit, and then there's this little controller chip. Well, let's say you did like some basic tests with just the circuit without the chip, and it was working, and then you put in the chip and it wasn't working. So the first thing you would do is you would do the process of elimination. You would take the chip out, right? Kind of set it aside in its own little circuit, and you would do some basic tests and be like, hey, is the chip working? Maybe it's the code that I put on the chip. Maybe this circuit is incompatible with the chip if the chip ends up working. So you start kind of, it just becomes muscle memory almost. So you start, developing that thing, and you can apply that to so many things in life, car repairs, which I don't know how to do still, but car repairs, anything really. So that's kind of that's a really big troubleshooting method that I use basically every single day. And it's usually the first thing I do. I immediately start cutting stuff out and eliminating things. The second subsection of this segment is don't be afraid to Google/research. So this will actually tie into our web news segment, as I mentioned earlier. But basically what it means is one of the most common things I hear in the industry from generalist positions, so people that kind of do like a lot of different things. So the main one is kind of an IT professional. They work on, computer mice, networks, monitors, desktops, you name it, printers, they're working on it. And I hear from them a lot that they're quote unquote professional Googlers. And what they're in fact referring to is the fact that there are so many issues with so many things that they're working with. There's so many models, there's so many devices, there's so many things that there's no way they're going to just know, right? They need to look it up. They need to look things up. They need to see an issue, hear about it or get it in an email, break it down and do the research and like look up the problem. But they're not, like, people will think that you're squandering or you're not skilled if you're doing that, but that's totally incorrect. First of all, you're getting really good research skills and you're getting the job done, right? If someone calls you because their monitor isn't turning on, they don't want you sitting there struggling, being like, man, is it the power supply? Like, is it this button? Is the cable broken? Whatever. When you could have just Googled that model number, Googled the problem, and maybe there was like a recall or something, or there was like, oh, this like little switch gets flipped sometimes, like you go in there and like flip the switch or whatever the problem is, right? So that's like that. Like, don't just sit there and struggle. Like you're not worse at your job if you have to research, because researching is also a skill. And also another thing is that once you start researching a lot, like you just start, doing a lot of issues and like figuring it out. As you figure those issues out, you're learning as well. Like now you know that, if another customer or another client calls you with that type of monitor, hey, it might be that little switch. Maybe I can just tell them. Or maybe, hey, you got to reboot and like boot into safe mode and do this thing or whatever, right? So you know how to deal with that specific problem. And as you start doing more and more and more of these, you start gaining that muscle memory or that intuition on things that you've seen before. So for example, if you like have done a lot of troubleshooting on desktop computers throughout like your career, even a specific error, like if someone's giving you like an error code and they're like, I don't know what error, 438 is or something, it will still trigger an idea in your head because you'll be like, oh, when's it happening? When's that? When's this? You'll know what questions to ask. And then you'll hear a lot of guys that are pretty good at IT say things like, that sounds like the hard drive is struggling, but I'll have to take a look in the shop kind of thing. Because they still need to do an investigation, but they're no longer, doing an investigation abroad. They're doing an investigation within a certain thing. And they would never get that intuition or that knowledge without having done literally, possibly hundreds of hours of Googling over the time that they've spent at their specific position. So don't be afraid to Google and research. And we're going to dive more into this in a more conversational form in the web news segment for this week. I'm going to pass it on to Learn the Source. This is the next segment. I'm going to pass it on to Mike here, and he'll kind of go over this next piece.
Yeah, for sure. Learn the Source is an important one, in my opinion, because it's like the actual knowledge aspect of this troubleshooting. So get to know the problem, the issue, and really understand why it's happening, what's causing it, where it's occurring, maybe who wrote it, like who wrote the problem, like who wrote the code that caused the issue. That kind of gives another indication of what the issue could be. Not to like, make fun of people or anything like that, but everyone has their own style of writing code, and everyone has their own kind of common mistakes they make. So it could narrow it down even in that way. So make sure that when you're seeing the issue and you go in, it's very tempting to kind of write a band-aid. So a band-aid could be something like, oh, I'll just comment this out and this feature won't work anymore, but at least the application will work. So don't do that kind of stuff often. I know sometimes in production ready environments where there's an emergency that's needed, but make sure it's a very temporary band-aid. When it's something especially that's taking away a feature that people are used to, people will notice it and get mad. Even if it's something small, you'll be surprised at how many people use those small features depending on the amount of people using your application. So make sure that that's a very temporary thing, and don't get into that mindset of, oh, I fixed it, I'm just going to go work on my other stuff now. Like, no, that's just maybe one step of your troubleshooting process, is getting the application to work again. When you know the source, when you've written the application itself, which is mostly how Matt and I write. Like, we don't do very much collaboration with other programmers, which is a whole different topic for troubleshooting. We know the source ourselves because we write it. It's a little bit easier to do the actual troubleshooting with that. I've had some experience doing it with like a bigger team and troubleshooting those. It could get more complicated, and you might need some more technique for those kinds of things. But when you know the source yourself, you can almost guess where the problem is. So like, for example, last week I had an issue with one of our applications where it gave a error on checkout and wouldn't display a barcode because of one certain item. And I'm like, oh wait, like I implemented this feature a couple weeks ago. Maybe it's because of that implemented feature that's happening. And I've already narrowed it down because I know the source of the issue. So like, that makes troubleshooting a lot easier. And like, I was able to fix that issue in less than 20 minutes, and it wasn't a band-aid, it was a complete fix. I documented the issue, and we pushed it to production within the hour. Clients are always happy with that kind of stuff. We received like a lot of praise when you can fix an issue that quickly, and when it's not just a band-aid. Like, a lot of people will fix the issue, say it's fixed, and then it's an actual band-aid, and then it'll come back up. And I'm not saying I haven't done that. I've done that, and that's why I like kind of learn from my mistakes as well. Please make sure that you really know where the issue is coming from. So the other thing is that have a bug log. So what that means is maybe have a Google sheet or an Excel sheet, and we're not talking like, there's many bug trackers and larger applications that are needed for multiple team like environments. But I'm talking for the freelancer, web contractor. We're talking to you guys right now. That's our experience, so we're not talking on a big corporate level. Have a bug tracker, have a Google sheet where you write down the bug for that specific application and how you fixed it, what it affected, stuff like that, so that if it ever pops up again, like let's say it was on a branch and you forgot to commit those changes into master, that kind of stuff will happen if it's a larger application, and you'll have a regression error. So you'll have this bug that pops up again, and then if you have that bug log, you'll be like, oh shoot, you know what? I must have missed it the second time after the merge. So it's really important to do that kind of stuff as well when you're troubleshooting, and it'll save you a lot of time. I'm notoriously bad at that right now, but like I've gotten a lot better because the time is money, and you don't want to waste it on doing the exact same bug over again. Although even if it happens and you don't have a bug log, I've noticed that you kind of pick it up a lot quicker. You're like, oh wait, well, even if I knew about this a year ago, like I kind of remember where to look at least in your code. That's always nice, but still have a bug log. Definitely important on that one. So yeah, I think that's it for just the basic general troubleshooting methodologies. Unless Matt has anything to add, I'm going to pass it off to him for segment 2, and that's debugging in the browser.
Right. So debugging in the browser. So the second segment here, we've also broken it up into two little like subsections. So I'll cover the first one, which is UI/UX debugging, which is my job. So primarily what I'll use is I'll of course use the inspect element for a given element that's giving me problems. So I'll literally like right click on something and then just go in and take a look. So the main elements that I use within that console window that comes up, and I am using the Chrome one to be clear. So what I use is I'll use the elements view at the top, so shows the DOM basically, and then I'll also use the styles view below it, so then that shows like the CSS pieces that are being applied, and then I'll use the console below it as well. So I'll kind of go into each one of those and what I specifically use them for. So the elements view, what I do is I use the elements view for the most part to kind of fine tune my selection process. So basically, like, especially if an element is hidden, or maybe it's not displaying correctly, or maybe I think it should be somewhere and it flew off on the page, as I'm sure we've all had. You can't exactly right click on it and inspect element. So what I'll do is I'll actually like look it up, like, in the DOM and be like, okay, where is it? Oh, maybe it has 0 width or something. And like, that's how I'll like fine tune my thing. I also will take a look at my nesting procedure. So more often than not, sometimes you've nested too much, as we all know with writing HTML. It's like, oh, I could take out a nesting, like this whole like div that's wrapping it. So let's take out this wrapper and like put it one level up. We don't need this many like nested like divs going in. So I'll do that quite a bit. This view is also really great for checking if something is overlapping, or if something, like I already said, is going off the page. But in this case, what I mean is, like, let's say you said, I want it to be 100% width, and you think that it's going to be contained by the screen, but let's say it's like over 5 pixels. So then when people scroll on a really small screen, typically it's a small screen, but when they scroll on a really small screen, it starts to enable that overflow X. And so they can scroll left to right, and it's kind of awkward because they can just do a little bit. It's like just like almost like it's jiggling when you're scrolling. So it like this, I use the inspect element a lot for this type of thing, where I'll like kind of go through my thing and be like, okay, where is this one? Okay, this one's contained. This one's not contained. Okay, let's fix that. And like, that's kind of like the end of the tweaking procedure of a site. But like those type of things are like really help with the polish of it. For the styles views, that's the part that shows the CSS that's being applied, specifically the properties, and it's right below it in my configuration. What I try to do is I try out new styles and adjustments in the window. So I use a lot of the checking and unchecking. So because it shows each property, beside each property there'll be a checkbox. So if it says like display absolute, I can like click the check mark, and it'll actually like make it pull that feature, like as if, and it'll render the page like as if that position absolute wasn't there. So I'll like mess around with that quite a bit, because sometimes I'll put in like a redundant property, and I'll just be like, I'll put it in, I'll test it, and if it, I'll mess around with making it, putting it on or off with those check marks, and if it's not needed, then I'll just pull it, because there's no point having something redundant. Sometimes I'll actually do like an entire set of changes in the style view, and so I can see them live. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying a whole page or anything like that, because like, if you refresh or something, your changes are gone. But like, maybe just like a small section, like I'll set up the skeleton in my actual CSS file, and then I'll mess around and be like, hey, like, when I'm engineering something, like should I be using absolute? Should I be using like block model? Should I be using flex? Because I have to kind of decide, should I be using grid? So I gotta kind of have to decide. So then I'll mess around with it and be like, oh, okay, I'll display it on block model for this. Like, it's old school, I'll do it like that, or flex or whatever. And so I'll make like a whole section. Same with colors as well. I will always, like, what I do, and it looks really ugly, but it's supposed to. So what I'll do most of the time is if you ever see one of my very, very, very early iterations of a site, it'll be literally red. So like just your property red, like the brightest red, and like blue. So like that, just that generic blue. And they really clash, because there's like so bright and like so bold. But that's the point, is what I do is I'll apply colors, and I'll sometimes do this in the style view, or I'll correct it in the style view. So what I'll do is, like, I'll be laying out my stuff, and I haven't put much detail in, and I want to make sure nothing's overlapping. I'll apply either within the styles view or within the actual CSS file, red and blue, sometimes yellow if I have like a third thing I want to check. And I'll see, because it's so bold and so bright and ugly, where I will see like, oh, this is actually overlapping a couple of pixels. Oh, this is actually like misaligned. I just never noticed. And then, that'll mess with responsivity. So I'll do that. And then with the styles view or in my CSS, I'll do the correction. I'll put like, the real color red that they want, or maybe it was yellow or purple, or doesn't matter. I'll put the real color in, and that's what I'll use that for. And I'll be like, okay, yeah, that looks good now. And now I know it's aligned properly, and that type of thing. And then finally, the kind of like the last part that I use out of that like dev view that comes out is I use the console. So But what I basically do is like most of my JavaScript is controlling styles, making menus appear, things like change opacity and moving around, changing background colors or what have you. So I'll put a lot of like console logs in my JavaScript just to see how my program is flowing. So I'll like even just generally, I'll even leave them in until maybe production, or sometimes even in production if the person, sometimes like a client wants to see if they're more technical. So I'll like literally just have like console logs running in, and it'll be like, changing color. Like if I click a button, it'll be changing color, opening menu, toggling menu, whatever. That helps me debug later. So if I if a client wants to change, now I know it's like, I'm usually very specific with my console log. So if I say toggle, it's a toggle. It's not an on and then it detects if it's on and then turns it off. It's literally just flipping the state. So I'm very specific, and then I know like Mike said, we don't work in a team, so I know what that means when I say toggle, and I know how I've coded it when I say on or off. So that's how I kind of work with that. I also use console logs to measure things. So sometimes I'll like be messing around and I'll be like, oh, maybe I should do percent base. Maybe I should use like, specific units, or like, relative units like EMs or like percents or whatever. So I'll use console logs to measure things. So I'll just like have like a listener that like listens to the window, and I'll just like squeeze the window and stuff. And I'll have like there's like myriad of like measurements of like, let's say client width or whatever. And it'll like constantly be updating for me. Right, but I'll be able to see, and I'll be like, oh, it's there's a troublesome spot at client width like 8 pixels or something, right? So I'll I use it just as a tool more or less, and I know that Mike's gonna get more into that later. But one other thing I did want to mention actually is the device viewer, like it's like the responsive viewer where you can like click on it and it will change the device into various like responsive like bits. So you can like select, like you click on it and then you can select like, oh, I want to make it look like a Nexus 6P, and you can check that. I use that thing all the time. So it's one of those like key features I use. And then you can, because it like changes your mouse pointer now, in one of the more recent updates, maybe been about a year now, maybe one of the more recent updates, you can change the actual, like it changes the mouse cursor to an actual like quote unquote touch. So you can kind of check touch events and that type of thing. So, and it's massively helpful for responsivity when you're just like dragging the window back and forth, and you can see like, oh, this is getting cut off, this is go over too much, etc., etc. I'm going to pass it on for the next little subsection here. I'm going to pass that on to Mike because he uses the console in a much more advanced way than I do. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'll go into some JavaScript breakpoints now. So pretty much if you're writing a lot of JavaScript, the console log is helpful and it's great, but you're just going to get buried in console logs, and it's a little bit slow as well, especially if you're like, outputting a massive JSON object. You'll see that it chokes on those big JSON objects because it's too much information to display in a console. So pretty much what I do is I go into the sources tab of the inspect element viewer of that viewer, and in the sources tab you'll see all your files. And if you go to your JS files, you can set breakpoints right on the lines of the JavaScript, and you can set breakpoints anywhere there, and then refresh your page and it'll run through and it'll actually break on the points that's happening. So you can do it on event listeners, you can do it on the actual initialization of your code, the load, whatever. You can set breakpoints in any place you want, and while it's on a breakpoint, you can actually see all of your variables in the state that they're supposed to be in at that certain time, which is a huge help. Like to be able to know that your scope variables, where all of your information is stored about the current state of the application, to know the exact values at a certain time, like before you send a request to a server, after you send a request to a server, after the client, like the user has clicked on a bunch of buttons, like to know the state at which all your variables, your current like global or local variables that are in, is a huge help. And it's a lot quicker than writing console log in every single state that you would need those variables, because you could output those variables in a console log at any time you want, but knowing them and then also going in and maybe changing a variable as well, you can do that during a breakpoint and see what happens. So that could be good for troubleshooting as well and testing. So be like, oh, if this doesn't work, like maybe if I just change this variable to be a number instead of just a string, maybe that'll work. Stuff like that. Huge help, huge time saver. I recommend everyone to use it. And yeah, that's my main troubleshooting tool. So just being able to put in any sort of breakpoint inside any loop that I want, and then going in and seeing what's happening during that breakpoint is what I use. I probably 95% of the time when I'm troubleshooting. I haven't used console logs in a while just because of that feature. It kind of completely replaced them for me. But it's still, I still see value in it, especially when you're writing code and it's a very simple JavaScript file maybe, and you just want to see the output at that very time, instead of having to go in and set a breakpoint. You can kind of just quickly see, oh yeah, so it's passing it in correctly, it's fine. So that's big for me. Definitely take advantage of those JavaScript breakpoints inside the inspect element sources tab. They're really cool to use. And then if you're ever debugging database stuff, so if you ever need to almost simulate a server or debug your server, I've used very recently and very not a lot, but I've used Postman. It's an application for doing that. So you can actually set up fake server calls inside of it and fake responses, which is cool. So you can when you're in your code and you need to see how your application will react to a certain server call, and you don't want to go and spin up a whole server just to see what would happen, you can actually set up a whole server call inside of Postman and then link it. It'll give you a port that it's going to be on, and you can actually send it from your application, from your web application. You can send it a call, and it'll respond just like you want it to, and you can see what happens in your application with that response. So I mean, I didn't know about this until recently. I used to just spin up a server and just have to actually code in a server call, a server response. I didn't even think about searching this. So I think I'm hoping that this helps someone else, because it definitely helped me. Now I don't have to do that. Postman is free. You can check it out. I think there is a paid tier, but I don't know what it would be for, because everything that I've used it for, it's done just perfectly fine. So yeah, those are my main, I would say, tools for debugging. I think in VS Code, you can install some debugging tools, so you can actually debug right in VS Code. I haven't done that too much because I don't see a problem in going into my inspect element. I don't see a problem in doing that. I don't think that takes me out of my workflow too badly. But you can definitely check out the VS Code version of it. But it's pretty much the same thing. You can actually set breakpoints right inside your VS Code, and then refresh your page, and it'll go through it just like your console log. Another thing is for debugging stuff like Vue, you might need an add-on into your Google Inspect element. So there's Chrome extensions for that, so you can check it out. You can just Google Vue troubleshooting Chrome extension, and you'll find it, no problem. And so that will let you do the same thing that I'm talking about. Go into your sources, see your Vue code, and be able to set breakpoints inside of your Vue create elements and all that. Your Vue components, so which is obviously really important. So I think that's it. I think we'll move on to the next section, is where I kind of put it all together. This is the application / story time segment. So I'm just going to give you a really I think should be interesting story about one of my most complicated troubleshooting experiences, and it's an ongoing experience, to be honest. We have Cordova application. So Cordova is a way to make cross-platform applications through web views. So which means that you can have one code base, just like a single page web app code base, and port it to iOS, Android, Windows, any sort of any mobile platform, which is great. And the reason we chose it was because we kind of were doing a lot of things with the web. We started on the Chrome apps for actual Chrome bases and Chromebooks, so we needed a one code base that could do that, and all the other it's a small team, right? So we needed it to do Chrome OS and Android and iOS. So that's why we decided to do Cordova. It can kind of handle that for us with a little bit of conditionalizing inside for and app detection, and a little bit of finagling the actual iOS and Android sides as well. It's a fairly sophisticated application. So what we needed to do, it's an always on device. So that the device is always playing media, and it's always playing commercial, it's always playing marketing media, kind of it's either going to be a slide with an image on it with marketing material, or it's going to be a video playing all the time, pretty much. And these devices, we're using Android devices. They're all different kinds. We have one Lenovo 10-inch device. We have a 15-inch a device from Outform. It's just like a media, a retail advertising company, Outform, and they have their own devices. So we bought from them. We have massive like portrait mode devices that are like human sized, big screens and portrait. So we have a lot of different devices, and because of that, we need to do a lot of debugging and testing on them, which is a little bit complicated because not only are we debugging the web side, we're also debugging the Android side because so when a problem comes up, you don't exactly know which side it is all the time. So you need to be able to communicate between the two. So you need to have an interface. You need to have a web view interface between Android and the web view that's running it. So we have an interface where you can pass in the console logs from the web side and pass them right into the Android side, so we can actually see all the problems in one view. We don't have to have many different views open. It also helps when you have like a lot of devices and you have to log those problems on all those devices. It helps to have them in all one view. It also helps when you're just charging your device. It's still able to send those problems to the Android side at least, and you can get that log later on, which is good. So the main issue we have is the application can run no problem for an hour, maybe 2 hours, but usually after the 2-3 hour mark, it would crash. That's an issue we had like long time ago, and those kinds of issues are extremely difficult to troubleshoot because you can't reproduce them. It's not a reproducible thing, it's a random thing. So it could be a memory leak. So I was sitting there with Android Studio open and the resource manager. So I was looking at memory. I was looking at processor. Like I was looking to see if anything was out of the ordinary. If it was just, if memory was spiking up all of a sudden, maybe it's a memory leak. If the processor was spiking up, maybe it's just overheating. I couldn't figure it out for a really long time what it was, and to be honest, we're still in the process of actually getting it down, but it seemed to be that in very high media centric playlists, when it's just doing a lot of video playback, the WebView media player isn't good at, maybe it's garbage collection, so it's not good at getting rid of that content. So sometimes when it would play a video and then another video in a row, it would overlap, I guess, and that would just be too much for the frame buffer, and it would crash. And that led us to kind of put in some limitations on what we can upload, how much to upload, but we also needed it to be fairly open. So we optimize the files, like, so we have a server side compression running. That helped quite a bit, but that server-side compression then brought in some problems with smaller videos. So like if there's a 2 megabyte video and you're compressing it even more, you're missing frames, and the WebView media player wasn't good at handling that either. That would cause it to freeze. Totally different problem, not crashing, it's freezing now. So these things were always issues and always came up and are still coming up, like especially when you're testing across so many different devices. We have some devices that are really bad at playing media because we're buying very low, inexpensive devices that weren't meant for running a video all day. Like think about running, even if you run Netflix all day on your tablet, on a low cost tablet, it's going to have some problems. It might freeze up, it might crash. Now we have to make sure that this is a retail environment we're running it at. We can't have it crash. So we have stuff in there where if it detects a crash, it'll reload the application just to where it was before, so the client doesn't see anything happen. If it's once every few hours, it's not gonna, throw it at them. If it's once every minute, obviously that's a problem. So we have code in there for that. We have code in there for making sure that if it freezes after a certain amount of time, it'll move forward. It'll move the playlist forward anyway. So even though a video is frozen, we can still go in there and move the playlist to the next item, and the next item will play, and it'll kind of move the thing. So the client's not seeing a dead screen for hours. You're seeing it for only a few minutes. They're not going to notice that in real-time environments. But really what it comes down to is knowing your limitations. So the problem is we have to now develop an application probably for specifically Android and not use a web view, because there's just not enough troubleshooting that we can do to limit to get it down to being 0 and being 100% uptime all the time, especially with these larger media playlists and those really small videos with very low frame rates. They're like, WebView is just not good at playing that on every single device. On some devices, fantastic. On some devices, not so good. So we have to get to a point where we can kind of maybe redo the application inside of in Android, in maybe in Kotlin, maybe just in Java. We don't know yet, but that's kind of the process we're going to. Right now, it's kind of just it's not as big of a problem now. We have hundreds of installations all across America. I think it's in the thousands now, actually. And they're running pretty well, but I still get a call here and there being like, oh, that froze up, and I go in, check the device, let it run for a few days, and see if I can catch the error. That's the kind of stuff like that. This is the kind of stuff that's really complicated with troubleshooting. Usually, my troubleshooting consists of an hour, maybe even less, of finding the error, because I know the code that I wrote so well that it's a little bit easier for me to go in and actually pinpoint where the problem is happening. But again, I wanted to bring up a larger and more complicated issue so that people know that it's not always going to be like, oh, it's a 5-second fix. Yes, there are going to be more complicated, and where you're going to have to implement a more sophisticated way of trying to find the issue. And when you're going to have patience. Like, longevity testing is you're going to have to let the device run for 8 hours. You're going to have to let the device run overnight. You're going to have to, sometimes I would wake up, I would have the device running overnight, and the first thing I wanted to do was check because I had a fix in that I was hoping would work. So like it's that kind of stuff, and it's a constant battle, and you're gonna have some moments where you're like, oh, the device has been running for 6 hours. I really hope that this fix works, and you're kind of going at it with some other problems, and all of a sudden the device crashes, and you go back and you have to context switch and start fixing this problem. So it's a complicated world out there. The different bugs that are out there is going to be a different method of trying to get them, trying to understand what they are. But just know that you'll always get there, and just be patient sometimes, and step away from it sometimes as well. Make sure that you're not fully integrated into it, because you're just going to drive you crazy. If you kind of have like a little bit of a break and you go back into it, it might help. So yeah, that's my story. So I'll pass it off to Matt, because he has a kind of a different take on troubleshooting stories. So
I wanted to mention one thing about your story, which was I think important to mention is like we mentioned that you shouldn't be band-aiding stuff. Like, you should understand the fix and you should understand what's going on. Yeah. But like, I think like that story is really key, because like, if the technology has like a problem, like, you guys understand the problem with the player in that, and then you have like a fix, and like some people would be like, oh, that's a band-aid, but it's like, but there's no way for you to fix the root problem. Like, you're not working on the web view, like you're using the web view. So like, at some point, sometimes you have to, like in your case, it's not even really a band-aid. It's, you're looking at the objective at the end of the day. You're looking at the objective of the project. You're being like, okay, this needs to be like fixed. We can't fix the root. So let's like, use the technology we have at our disposal and fix it in this way. So I think that's really key for people, because like some people will like, kill themselves. They'll go like freaking crazy, staying up all night being like, I found the problem, I understand what's going on, but there's no fix. And then they'll like want to switch like full code base and this, that, and the other thing. But sometimes like a workaround or just a different way to use it is needed. Yeah. And like, it isn't like, a band-aid is a quick fix, and it's like really almost sloppily done usually. This isn't a band-aid. This is just a solution. It's just not the same as going in and being like, oh, I forgot to set this as a 1. Yeah. It's not something as cut and dry as that. So I just think that that's important and that's a good thing that you brought that up.
Yeah, definitely.
So my crazy story, this is the craziest troubleshooting I've ever done. I was in IT for a while, so I've done a lot of troubleshooting, and so this was like VPN gateway failure. So this is not web dev related, but like the procedure still applies. I will, like, full disclosure, I did change some rudimentary details about the project just for security purposes. So, but you're going to still get the gist of the story. But anyway, so a brief kind of background. So, if you don't know, a VPN is a virtual private network and allows you to be virtually connected to a network, basically. And what it does is and a VPN gateway handles your device logging into that network, essentially. So, for example, let's say you have a bunch of smart home devices, and you can only control those devices on your home network. You've set it up so that it's not accessible from like outside. But let's say sometimes you do need to do that. So what you could do is you could set up your smartphone's data connection to VPN, which is establishing a tunnel. That's what they call it. Establishing a tunnel into your home so that you get like your proper local IP, which is normally something like 192.168.0. something on most like just home routers, right? So you could VPN in so that you're, quote unquote, connected to your home like you would be regularly. And then you could control your smart home devices, assuming your security and everything is set up properly. Like I said, when you're connected to the VPN, it's referred to as like tunneling, or like you have a tunnel up or a VPN tunnel. So if I mention that going forward, just so you know what that means. So basically what the actual scenario was in my case was basically we needed a mobile device to connect to a VPN and be able to access a Word doc on one server and then stream a video from another server. So basically it connects in and just does those two things. Real easy, real simple, whatever. So what broke, and this is crazy, was the mobile device was able to connect to the VPN, so the gateway appeared to be working. It was able to establish a tunnel. It was like a stable tunnel. There was no problems with that, whatever. And it was unable, though, to access the dock or access the video. So it's like, okay, we gotta start, going through the thing. So we checked if the device was actually connecting to the tunnel. So like maybe the device is reporting wrong, maybe there's something wrong with the gateway, whatever, but it was connecting properly. The device was saying, hey, I'm connected. The gateway was like, hey, this device is connected, and we gave it this IP and everything. But then we go and check, and we go, okay, did the device get the right IP? So we gave a certain pool of IP addresses to the VPN gateway to give to the mobile devices or things that connected to the VPN gateway. And sure enough, it was getting the right IP, it was getting the default gateway, it was getting the whole thing. It was getting all that. So there's a check, that's working. So then you go, okay, I don't know what's going on. So I said, okay, maybe it's a firewall issue. So I say, okay, I'm going to steal an IP, so I'm going to take it out of the pool of the VPN. So I'm going to take it right off the end of it, usually is what I'll do. And I'll pull that one out, and I'm going to apply it to a device that's in the network. So I'm going to be actually on the network. I'm not going to use the VPN. I'm cutting out the VPN. I'm eliminating the VPN for a moment. And I'm going to test it. And I test it, and it worked. It was, able to stream, able to see it. So I'm like, okay. So now we know that these IPs are fine. So it's not like, the firewall is blocking this IP. So we know that these IPs are fine. We also now know that the internal network is working, and we know that the video is working, and we know that the dock works. So that eliminates a whole crap ton of stuff. Okay, fair enough. So now it's like, it's probably the VPN gateway, or, something's going on there. So what we started doing what's called sniffing traffic. So we put on a traffic sniffer. I believe it was Wireshark. Anyways, we put on this traffic sniffer, and we were going through it, and we kept dumping logs. So we would connect the mobile device to the VPN, and then try to hit the video, or then try to hit the Word doc, and we do this over and over again. What was really bizarre is, normally when you sniff traffic, if you've ever done it, you'll see things like, error, or, this has been administratively blocked, means like, I gotta open this port, or like, we couldn't route this because of this, or like, you'll see something that will point you toward like, this device isn't working, or, this thing isn't working, or this route isn't here, etc., etc., etc. We never saw that. We saw nothing. Like, it's like the device isn't there, but the device was getting the IP, so we're like, okay, this is kind of weird. So we got a second device, and we're like, okay, we're going to connect these simultaneously and see what's going on here. So you got the first device, it's connected to the VPN, it's fine. Got a second device connected to VPN, and it also got an IP, like there wasn't any IP overlap, there wasn't any conflict. So we got the sniffer running, and we try to hit the two, doesn't work. So it's like, okay. Now keep this in mind that, we're working on this for I think it was upwards of 2 weeks during all the time that we had between all our daily tasks that we had to do. So we're we're doing this over and over and over again, testing different things, trying it out. And we got to the point where we were like, okay, I'm going to see if I can even force the traffic to work. So I went in and I set up a static route. So I set up a static route to the Word doc, and then I set up a static route to the the video. So I set them up. We connect the device, and it worked. And it was like, okay. Maybe the router's messed up. But then we think, wait a second here. This is where it starts getting really messy. Wait a second here. We did that whole thing where I already described, I pulled something out of the pool. I pulled an IP out of the pool. I applied that to one of the I applied that to one of the devices like, internally, and then I tested it. So the router's working. It routes that IP. It knows where everything is, and this was before the static route. So what the heck? Plus, like, static routes kind of get messy. Like, you got to, like, make sure they're well documented, and you don't want to, you know, if let's say in the future it needed to access, like, a Word doc, the video, and then, like, something else, like, you know, I don't know, it needed to pull a different, like, a spreadsheet from another server. Like, you got to add another static route. Like, it's not as dynamic, and it's a bit of a mess. So we're like, okay, something's seriously wrong here. So we go, okay, we got to figure out what the hell. So and all this time we've been researching, going through forums, reading countless pages. Like it's nuts. Like people are calling us. Like like we're getting like tech staff to help us. It's ridiculous. So basically, we find out that it's almost like a baseline networking thing. I'm not like a networking expert, to be clear, but how I understand it, it's like a very baseline networking thing was failing here. It's called NDP, Network Discovery Protocol. And NDP kind of like flies out everywhere and allows like routers and stuff to actually like discover things like, oh, something like connected to the network and this is its IP and this is how you get to it. So that like, let's say, you know, I connect to my Wi-Fi with my phone and then like, let's say Mike does the same thing. I could like, you know, send him, depending, you know, if we had an app, I could like send him a file over Wi-Fi because it knows where each other are basically. So like, that wasn't being sent. It wasn't being generated. It wasn't being sent, and nothing was discovering this device. It was connecting, so a mobile device was connected to the VPN. Like I said, the router was giving it the proper IP and it was giving it the proper like the whole thing, the default gateway. It was doing all of that, but it wasn't discoverable. So then nothing could talk to it. It'd be like, hey, I need to talk to this device, and it'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about, basically. So the static routes, like that, like the static routes kind of pointed us toward that. It was like, okay, there's something going on here. So we said, okay, maybe the VM is damaged. Maybe the OS is damaged. You know, we've been in here for weeks and been messing around, doing like a fine tooth comb, going through it. Can't find anything wrong. So, you know, we've been messing stuff, you know, we've been messing around with little things. You know how like servers and everything else have like hundreds and whatever of configuration. Now, no one's configuration is perfect. So we were like, you know, changing little configuration changes. Like, oh, this probably won't fix it, but let's, you know, clean it up here and there. So we thought maybe one of those little quote unquote cleanups broke it. So we said, okay, we spin up another, you know, virtual machine. We, you know, same OS. We reinstall the VPN gateway software. We're you know, fucking around with it. And it still doesn't work. We're like, okay, same error. Like, what the hell is going on here? So what ended up being the problem was, I set up the static routes like because the people had to use this, like the other workers had to use this like testing setup. So I said the hell with it. I set up the static routes and then like I well documented it internally, so like, you know, the team could look at it, and I made like a little table of like my static routes, so you know how to add them, you know, in tandem if you needed that extra, you know, that Excel sheet like I mentioned earlier, if you need that spreadsheet on another computer. What ended up happening is we found that there was, and I had posted on a couple of forums, and what ended up happening was the VPN gateway software that we were using had a bug in it, or so we assume. It had a bug in it. And we don't know whether it was something specific to our network or what, but other people were reporting it. Very few people, but other people were reporting it. And what ended up happening is we just like, no matter what we did, we couldn't like get that thing. Like I said, the NDP just wasn't happening. And what we ended up doing was, I think we were using like, I don't know, version 2 or something, and we needed that for testing, like version 2 and upward. But we said, okay, we're going to, you know, take version 2 of the VPN gateway off. We're going to install like 1.5 or something, an old version. And it worked. So at that point, now we know, okay, like something's wrong with version 2 and up, but not many people are reporting it and whatever. So I literally went on the forum, posted my fix, told them like, you know, this is like, my fix is essentially a workaround, but it's, again, kind of like Mike's thing, it's something that we can't fix. Like, I'm not working on the VPN gateway software. You know, it's a vendor, it's a company, like they got to do it. And that's basically what ended up happening. I found that like ridiculous solution with the static routes. Like, it sounds easy, but like the investigation was the craziest thing ever that I'd done anyway. And that's basically the moral of the story. I basically reported it on the official forum, made sure I documented everything right. We ended up getting it working so that people could use it, which is all people really care about, the users. That's all they really care about. And that's it. That's the best we could do. And then I believe, and I don't know whether I'm remembering this correctly because it was years ago now, but I believe I was told that in like a future version when they updated it did actually end up working because somebody like removed one of the static routes and then like had updated the VPN software and it started working. So it ended up being like a rather complex problem within the VPN software where, you know, I'm not blaming that VPN, you know, gateway vendor. Like that's such a random problem and it probably was affecting only certain people. So that was my experience with that. Pretty long-winded and pretty ridiculous, but that's that. I don't know if you have any other comment with that, Mike, but I think we can jump into web news if you want.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll add a little bit to that. So like you said with the updated version or with the version that just like it updated it and now it doesn't work, right?
Right.
I think that happens a lot more often than not. Like I don't know, my major problems, my like major troubleshooting issues were probably caused by updated versions. Like one of them was updating jQuery.
Right.
Broke like some really random thing and just like one of the features that one of our clients use just doesn't work with a newer version of jQuery. I mean, I like that's happened. I think I had a slider issue where I updated the source of the slider because I wanted one of the features that they added, and yeah, that broke another feature. Like when you're updating something, make sure you know that it's probably going to break it and you're going to need to do another series of tests whenever you update any library. That's another reason why I try to stay away from using libraries for absolutely every little piece of my code. Like if it's something very simple, like even maybe a light box, sometimes I won't use a library, even though there's some really good lightbox libraries out there, because I know that if it ever happens that I need to update that library, or if I bring in another library and there's some sort of incompatibility between the two, that puts more complexity on the code. So yeah, just be careful when updating any sort of software or any sort of libraries you have on your production devices or on your production code bases. So yeah, that's what I'll add to that, and I'll let you introduce the web news.
Sure. So actually, that's a really good point too. Just one last little quick point is there's a reason why a lot of enterprise guys don't like updating their Windows. Because like, you know, if you have like some random, you know, enterprise specific software, maybe even like in industry, right, where the software doesn't update as much as consumer software does, like apps update like every day or like every week. Whereas like, you know, this software might be 20 years old and then like Windows will just like remove a DLL that's needed and in like an update because like it's like, oh, like, you know, 0.00004% of users use this. I'm going to pull it.
Yep.
And then it's like, oh, fuck, that 0.00004 was like a major, like, I don't know, oil rig or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's serious, right? So there's a reason why people don't like to update, and that's the reason. So
yeah, that's for sure.
So let's jump into web news. So web news, and we've already touched on this, but like I want to kind of have like a proper conversation because I think it's important. It's so I've titled it "Experience Doesn't Trump Research." So basically, I'm going to go back through basically what we talked about, and then Mike and I'll have a conversation about it. So Googling and researching isn't something to shy away from. I know a lot of people think that like, oh, you looked at the documentation, like you don't know what you're doing or whatever. But no. Like when you're using a new framework or a new technology, or even if I just am using it, I'll frequently have like the documentation, like the official documentation actually on my, like on like my second screen, and I'll just like pull it up all the time. And like this is really key. Like you can't commit everything to memory. Like there's literally like thousands of features available in most complex software and hardware these days, and like it's impossible to, you know, remember everything. Like it really sucks when like a client from like, you know, an older project will contact us and be like, hey, like I want to implement this one thing, and it's like I remember and I knew how to do that, but I don't know how to do it now. Like I just can't remember because it's like some old CMS or something that we've moved on from, right? So it's like one of those things that kind of sucks, but like you still have the, and this is kind of the key thing, is like you still have the intuition and the knowledge to relearn that quickly and then like go and re-implement it. And that usually you would need to use that official doc. So there's nothing wrong with that. Also, because everything has like thousands of features and thousands of parts and everything, it's impossible to anticipate everything. Like that's why there's recalls for stuff. That's why there's like, you know, major hot fixes that have to go up. That's why things like servers get pulled down and get put back online. It's because like, you know, it was engineered for this, and maybe the environment changed at one point, or like one random use case, you know, that was again 0.0004% of the people didn't think, you know, or like that used it, and everyone thought like, oh, we'll just like kind of kick them out, like move them out, and then it ends up being a major, you know, that's a major 0.0004%, you know, like a major client uses it or something. Mm-hmm. That's why things get re-engineered, there's hot fixes, etc. and like I said, you start getting muscle memory and intuition, and you start, rising your making your research skills a lot better, and you end up making research notes and that type of thing. So it kind of makes you like a more proper quote unquote technician for like software engineering or even IT work, like I've mentioned throughout. So yeah, I think that's a kind of a good like conversation point. I don't know like what specific you want to add to that, Mike, but like I feel like there's like an aura of shame sometimes in the industry when people ask questions. So I'll let you maybe touch on that. Maybe even some of the experiences we've had on like Stack Overflow or something.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was actually recently reading a post on our web dev on Reddit, and there was a person saying like, listen, I have 10 years experience in the industry in web development, and I'm on the daily looking up stuff on Google. And I think that's never going to go away. I don't know, like I know that there's a few like coding interviews where it has to be closed book style, but I think even that's kind of going away nowadays. I think the coding interviews now will more likely than not just be assignments that they send you and you try to like do, and then maybe just a few general knowledge questions during the interviews is what I would expect for the future, because knowledge of one specific thing enough where you can go in and just start coding it from scratch is it's almost scary to have that. Yes, after probably 10 or 15, 20 years, you can do that in some way, in some capacity, but realistically, that's almost a hindrance because you're not looking at the newer ways of doing things. Like if you're a 10 year experience JavaScript developer and you haven't looked at Google in 10 years, you're coding, back in whatever 2005 2010. Like it's not necessarily a good thing. You want to always be on top of the ways of doing it, and you want to always do things as efficiently as possible, and Googling it and looking at, maybe not always going with the first answer on everything, going in and reading the answers and understanding what they are. That's an important skill as well. Like using that knowledge of Googling, using that knowledge of research to understand a topic better, and then implement that solution that you found that works for you, and that looks like it's a current solution that'll work in the future. Those kind of skills are almost more important than being that developer that has 15 years experience and is able to write from scratch, because he might be using outdated technology. It might have security vulnerabilities he doesn't know. He's not Googling. I mean, I'm sure that those people don't exist. I'm just, making up this amazing 15 year experience web developer that doesn't Google, but yeah,
it just knows every framework.
Exactly. Like don't be afraid to Google. Like it's not a scary thing. And everyone, like I've known a bunch of people that are like, well, I'm afraid that if I Google every single thing, I'm not going to learn anything. That's totally false. That's the point of Googling it. You're learning it as you're implementing it. Maybe don't always just copy paste the code. Just look at what it's doing, and then only use the pieces that you need. Like sometimes you'll find an answer within an answer, right? But it'll be like solving 15 different things, and you copy paste that whole thing and just use one little part of it. Try not to do that too much, even though sometimes time constraints and stuff like that will make you do it. But try to know what's actually solving your problem in those answers. And you can follow up, be like, oh, well, I found the solution. Maybe I can Google the solution and find more information on that solution, that specific one. So it's a weird rabbit hole you go down when you're trying to troubleshoot and when you're trying to learn new things when you're doing research, where it's almost like one thing will lead to another, and then you'll get your perfect answer most of the time. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like when with research and with Googling, like I don't know if I'd be able to do this job without the internet right now.
I think that's like a fair point to say too, is like, even like if I'm just thinking off the top, like if you look at kind of like a polar opposite industry, so like literally like an industry, industrial thing where like you're fixing cars, for example, or like a trade, if a new valve or a new car comes out, they need to look at it because it's like proprietary, right? Like the frameworks are very much like that. It's not like, it's not like the mechanic doesn't understand like how valves work. It's the fact that like this valve might have like a 45-degree angle with like a special emergency button to press and like 3 ways to flush it, whereas this other one has 2. And it's like, how the hell would he, first of all, remember that unless he's working on just that type of car? And how the hell would he know like what that engineer engineered, right? Even that engineer, like that engineer, it probably engineers valves every day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if he's asked to, like, you know, oh, hey, we need a revision too because like this valve sticks, like he probably doesn't remember the valve that he made for, I don't know, some car 13 years ago. He's probably made like 1,000 valves, so he's like, oh, I got to look it up, and he'll look up his spec. Like, there's a reason why things are documented. And going to school is basically like Googling it. Like, yes, you're doing it yourself, but like, think about it. Like, all it is a person has essentially learned it at some point, whether it be from a book or from Google, and then they're hired because they know the stuff and they teach you. But you have to remember too that they have a prep thing. Like, there's a whole thing of like, you know, they prep for their class. If they're a good teacher, they'll prep for their class. They'll like have like, you know, their book there, and they'll reference stuff. Sometimes they'll say like, hey, I don't remember that, but I'll get back to you if you have a question. Like, they'll email you back later.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's, you know, people you don't remember everything. And we had a really good teacher for our embedded class, our last embedded class, in our final semester. And I remember he said that one of the things we learned, I think he was teaching us how to make drivers. And like, he ended up making our driver set for us, and then we used them because like we were trying to learn basically how to use, like, how to program more or less at that point, and like how to think of it. And he said, like, he's like, I don't remember half this crap. He's like, honestly, he's like, I looked in the manual, I figured out, because he worked on tons of microcontrollers. He's like, you know, I pulled out the manual and was like, oh, I need to like figure out how to turn on, you know, pin 1. So I figured out how to do it, and then I like wrote a driver to make it do it, and then that driver is like an API. So then in our class we would write like, you know, general input output dot on, like, you know, 1 dot on, so the first one would turn on or something. Mm-hmm. But that like 1 dot on runs like his little driver that does it. But he even said to us, I don't remember how this driver works. I could figure it out again. I can go and like figure it out, and it's like documented, and I have like bookmarks in my book in my manual / book for this thing. But I don't commit to memory how like every single microcontroller turns on its output pins. I don't remember that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. Which is like super interesting, and it's almost like inspiring to hear. It's like, I don't need to literally know everything. And like, if you're a jack of all trades, like, it doesn't, like, a lot of people will think that's almost a negative. Like, maybe half and half think it's negative, but like, it really isn't necessarily a negative, because like the guy who's super experienced in like, let's say, just one type of microcontroller is going to be absolutely useless when like that company goes under. That microcontroller manufacturer goes under, or maybe the company that he's working for switches microcontroller manufacturer. He's going to be like virtually in the same boat as like the newbie, with the exception of the fact that he has probably, you know, better research skills potentially, and or like, you know, he just has more experience. But the guy who was in the department who was always working on like, you know, 10 different types of microcontrollers, his research skills are going to be way and far beyond that guy who was working on the one type. And he's going to have way more intuition, because he's going to be like, oh, I know that some manufacturers use a 0. Some manufacturers use a 1. Some use a 5. You know, he knows. Mm-hmm. He knows the thing, and then he'll know generally. It's like that intuition where I said, like, a good technician will be like, sounds like the hard job, but I got to check. And he'll have, like, a narrowed view. Whereas that other guy, you know, he's been around a long time, maybe, so maybe he has that intuition, but it's not going to be as sharp as the guy who uses that intuition all the time and, like, earns those, like, research skill points, if you will. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, no, for sure. Like, it is really a skill point. Like, you need to know how to research. It's important. And people, you know, complain about school sometimes and the fact that it's not real life and all that, but really you're Googling a lot at school to figure out all these problems. This is all new era stuff, by the way. Like, you know, 20 years ago you couldn't do this, but now, like, you have to be able to keep up with the industry. And really, I very much believe that a person that's stuck in the old way of, I have to know everything and I have to just, you know, memorize it and that's it, that it's a huge hindrance on the company he's working for, because they're not evolving with the times. Like, there's so many times that I've gone into an answer of a question where I learned that what I was doing in general was old technology, and there's a way better way to do this. And like, I would go in and replace the code that I was that even caused the issue in the first place with a newer, more efficient technology. I've done that many times. So it's super interesting when that mm-hmm. stuff like that like happens, right? When you can even, like, you're even like self-reflecting on it, you know? For sure. Yeah. Like, I can give an example. Like this last week I was working with promises, and before promises, I would work with callbacks, and then I went into a callback thread on Stack Overflow, and people are like, oh, you should work with promises. And I looked into promises. I thought, yeah, this is a nicer way of writing a callback. Why not work with promises? And then like a week ago, I was going into a promise thread in Stack Overflow, and people are like, oh, well, you should be using async awaits and stuff. And I looked into that, and yeah, that's true. Async awaits are the future of the callback promise kind of scenario. So it's interesting that like being able to reach out and get all these answers is also moving me forward, like moving us as developers forward, and being able to kind of be on the top of the industry. Maybe not all the time, but at least in these little kind of problems that we come up, like it's constantly going to come up. Like, you think I'm going to memorize async awaits and stuff like that? No, I'm going to go back and I'm going to Google how to do it again, and I'll find what's next, what's after async awaits. And you have to be willing to really dig in and like evolve as a developer, and researching on Google and researching on other platforms definitely helps with that.
I think that's a really good point too, because I think a lot of guys too that are starting out, like, I mean, I probably use really rudimentary JavaScript because I'm just controlling styles, and like I won't know all that type of stuff, right? Like, you know, I won't know like everything about it. Like, I know what a callback is, but I wouldn't know about promises and this, that, and the other thing. And I think that a lot of people would see that as something discouraging, especially if they're just starting out, where they're like, well, damn, I don't know anything. I remember I needed to loop through something, so I just did what I knew to do. I'm like, okay, I'll use a for loop. And I just used a for loop, and then I don't know, like, I think it was on Medium or something. A couple days later, I went on there, and they were like, for loops are like what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, how dare you?
I'm like, I counted up to 5. Like, I'm not gonna change that. So, like, I think, you know, like, yes, like, I'll read that, and, like, maybe I'll be like, hey, this is a better way to do a loop. But, like, I'm counting to 5 here, guys. Like, you know, for loops are still around for a reason. So, like, you know, evolve, absolutely. Like, I absolutely agree with that. But don't feel bad if, like, the thing you made yesterday, you know, was a for loop. Like, I don't care. Like, I have to go and actually fix that tomorrow night. So yeah. I'm going to use that for loop. I don't care. Like, you know what I mean? Because it still works. And the customer doesn't care either. It's fast. It's efficient. It works. It's not like it's a security thing. I'm counting to 5, you know?
But the cool thing is that, yeah, you're not going to replace it all the time. I just gave one little example, right? Like, most of the time I'll just keep going and troubleshooting the thing that I'm working on. But the fact that you learn that, yeah, for loops are like, there's other ways of doing it. Like, even like, you don't have to replace it, but you've learned that there's other way of doing this. And in the next project where you need it, obviously this is kind of like an abstraction of an actual problem. Like, a for loop is a for loop, but like
it's a pretty simple scenario.
Yeah, exactly. when you need another for loop, you'll look in maybe and try this other way of doing it, a more modern way. Maybe it's more efficient. Maybe it's not. Like, sometimes you get the wrong advice. That's why I said Google the answer. Like, you get the answer, Google it and see what people are saying about that. If there's a lot of threads about it, if people are talking positively about it, if there's a lot of, you know, this versus that, and people are saying like, oh yeah, I love this way more than that, it's worth looking into even more and maybe implementing into your future projects or your current ones. So yeah, be aware that not everything out there is correct. Like, you know, not everything on the internet is right. Everyone, I'm hoping, knows that. Although some people I question.
I mean, there's lots, like, it's all opinion and a lot of comments, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a key thing. Like, if I had to count up to 5 right now, like, even though I read that thing, like, like you said, like, I know there's another way to do it. So if I needed a complex counting method, I would absolutely look that up. But if I need to count up to 5 tonight, like, again, or like if I'm fixing that one that's pre-existing tomorrow, I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to, like, keep it. And I don't feel bad for it either. Like, I mean, as long as it works, as long as it's, you know, secure, it does the objective. You know, people like freak out, but it's like, at the end of the day, if someone's using your API, like, let's say you're serving an API of some kind, the guy's not looking at what your API is doing. He's only looking at the functions or like the API like calls that you're allowing him to do. Like, you know, you're going to be doing something that's seen as disgusting to somebody else, and, you know, vice versa too. You might be like, fuck, that guy starts at like 1. Like, why isn't he starting at 0 or like whatever, right? You know, it's whatever happens, or however they address. And I think another thing, actually, that's a good thing to bring up too about the internet is, like, there's a ton of, like, toxicity I find on, like, Stack Overflow and stuff, where, like, a newbie will ask a question and they'll be like, oh, this is a duplicate question from 2009, and it's like, but he's so inexperienced that he, like, looked around, noticed a lot of his answers were on Stack Overflow, and so he went, you know, the person made an account, he or she made an account, and then they, you know, they asked the question, be like, hey, I need to, like, figure out how to hover, like, a hover effect works,
Mm-hmm.
And sure, like sometimes it's lazily done, but sometimes you can tell from what they're saying. Like let's say they'll summarize what they've looked up so far. You can tell from what they're saying that they're very inexperienced, and it's like literally their first button that they're making.
Yeah.
And people like come in there, and the moderators will come like running in, and they'll be like, "Oh man, this is a duplicate. Like, what are you guys talking about? Like, look this up more." But it's like he didn't know what even to look up. Like, this is a stepping stone, and he's learning, like we already said several times, the research skill.
Yeah.
He's learning that thing. I remember I was on a thing once where there was some sort of bizarre bug. Which I think has like been since fixed. But there was a bizarre bug where it was like if you nested too many like rels and like absolutes, like position rels and absolutes into each other in a certain combination or something like that. It was a couple years ago now. It would always shift your stuff down 1 pixel.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like discussing like, how do I fix this? And I literally said like my actual fix is to like, it's a glitch clearly because no other browser's doing it. Like there's something wrong. So I said my fix, which is more or less a workaround, is like you take the wrapping thing. I don't exactly remember exactly what I typed, but it's like you like wrap the whole thing, and then you just position rel and you move it up. I did like a margin top -1, and they were like, this isn't a solution. Like this is ridiculous. And like I got downvoted, and the comments that were ripping on me got upvoted. So like that's a super toxic environment. You know what I mean? Like I can handle that, like whatever. But like for somebody who would be like totally new. And this like learning it, and then a bug is now plaguing them. They think they're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And like imagine if they had posted a solution or something. Like I don't even post on Stack Overflow anymore. It's just like, okay, I'll use it as a resource, but I'm not going to post on there.
Yeah,
for the most part.
It can get pretty toxic in there. I've seen some good stuff where if someone posts a thing that's already been posted, sometimes they'll link the thread that will solve that issue. I think that's an okay way of doing it, but you're right that it's not teaching them how to actually Google that, like how to actually get to that solution themselves.
Yeah.
I think a more positive way of doing it would be to actually in the answer, right, be like, listen, you gotta search for this, and this inside of Stack Overflow or on Google, and then you'll find it. Instead of being like, oh, this has already been done, close the thread. Like that, it is a fine line. Like a lot of people are bad at research, and people are not willing to believe that, or they just think that they're lazy. Because obviously there are some lazy people that just don't want to do it. But still, like we have to give people benefit of the doubt sometimes and lead them in the right direction. So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, like, and I think even Stack Overflow at one point, like I never read the article, but they had come out and said they're like they even almost like admitted it or something like that. Like don't quote me on this because I've only saw headlines on it, but it was like Stack Overflow had come out at some point and said like they were acknowledging like there was toxicity.
Yeah.
They were like, fuck, like, we understand this, like, it's a lot of shit. Because it's almost like even on Reddit a lot, where like you'll post something and then like a mod will come like running in to like police you. And it's like, dude, like I looked at the rules, looked at what other people were posting, and then I posted something that was similar to it. But like, I didn't copy anybody. It was like my post, it's just the same type. And like a model come running in and being like, oh, we can't have this on here. And it's like, I understand trying to clean up garbage, but it's like, if I'm doing something the same as everybody else, why aren't you clearing him up? Yeah. You know what I mean? And like that applies to, whether you're on a like a regular subreddit, like a one for entertainment, or whether you're on like a serious subreddit for work, like even like, r/webdev or whatever. I don't think I've posted on there, so I don't know how like policey they are. But there's a lot of stuff like posted on, and they'll like come and immediately try to police it. Like, oh, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. This is getting up, folks. We got to shut this down. Like, this is too similar to like Jim Bob's post from 2004. Yep. It's like, well, I didn't look that up. Like, what? Like, come on. I didn't go and look back into 2000. Let me go back into the archives. Let me get like my World Book 1999 for my Windows 98 PC. Let me see if if I'm accidentally plagiarizing one of the sentences in there. Like, come on.
I mean, that's what the world's going to kind of come to, right? Like there's just so much content that we can create that eventually all the content is going to be plagiarizing.
In a way, yeah. Like, I mean, and people like will blatantly copy stuff. But...
Yeah. I mean, okay. Well, yeah. All right.
it's see, like even for us, like it is like, I mean, this is exactly why this is a good web news. Like, yeah. it's a complex issue.
It is.
And it's I think newbies are almost the victim, assuming they're trying. Like, they're not being really lazy, right?
Yeah. and not actually researching, which I'm sure there's some people that don't research and then post asking questions without that. Like I've seen that before, but I've also seen the other side where people are researching and they just don't know how. So benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and just keep on trucking if you're one of those victims of being being policed off of a forum, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know if I value my Stack Overflow post rate that much anymore.
Yeah.
I kind of just I'm at the point now where I kind of just want to get the hustle going and get my own shit going. So.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Do you have anything else to comment, Mike? Or
no, I think that's it. I think we've got it pretty good.
Yeah, we definitely covered a whole bunch. This has really been like a packed episode, all the way from IT to crazy video players to whatever else, right? So a bunch of troubleshooting and whatnot. So thanks for listening, everybody. If you can find us on most of the socials via @HTML all the things. That's on Instagram and on Facebook. On Twitter, you can find us @HTML everything. We're also on Medium and GitHub, so you can look that up. And of course, all these links will be in the show notes. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you're listening to this on, and we are signing off.